First things first. In the paper that is lying in front of you, there is a revised copy of this about 1400 to 1500 page. It is revised. There's a lot more information in there, and I'm going to use that today. However, there is an error in it. So let's correct that first. Now, if you took your finger and put it right in the middle of the page, you would be very close to Henry VI. But I would like you to go up one person to Edward IV. And it says Edward IV, May 1461 till 3 October 1470. And then it says, son of Richard, Duke of York, deposed, brother of Henry V. Mother Elizabeth Woodville. No. Wife was Elizabeth Woodville. Poor lady would be greatly insulted. I aged her 30 years there. Okay. So if you have then Elizabeth Woodville as the wife of Edward IV, you are correct. Well, P would be Plantagenets, L would be Lancaster, and Y would be York. But my typewriter won't go out that far because I keep running into the margins. And it says you got it, and then all that information is over there under the names, and that's not where I wanted it, so I abbreviated. Okay. Now, history has this, in my opinion. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Carrie. Continuing on with Edward IV, it says he was deposed. Now, I suppose he was at one point, but he also died of disease.
That was the second time.
Okay.
That would be the 2 lines down.
Oh, I see. He's in there twice. Oh, that's tricky. Well, they had a king and a queen. Yeah.
Yeah. What really happens is that this list is sequential.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Now, let's go back and go back to that other page. The shorter one that talks about the same thing. Only it's got Edward the Black Prince, Richard II, and John of Gaunt. Yes, I added John in there because, okay? He really is such a player. And he is a brother. And if on that page, just so that we get him in his place, notice the third entry that said Edward the Black Prince. He was the eldest son of 7. But then drop down to John of Gaunt. He is the third son of 7. So those two are brothers. Okay? And it's that concept that we've talked about so many times about eldest son gets everything, second son gets nothing. Well, you can imagine what the third son gets. You know, there's the monastery. Yeah. He hung around long enough that he died in his bed, which is, that just doesn't happen. All right. So now all of that will come together. Edward III had 6 sons. Edward, his son, was a prince. Edward III had 7 sons. It doesn't work right if I don't put the right numbers in there. First line, Edward III had 7 sons. Okay. Of whom Edward, again, the Black Prince, was the eldest of 7. And John of Gaunt was the 3rd of 7. But because of the way it works, the flow went from Edward III to Edward the Black Prince to his son, Richard II, bypassing John of Gaunt and all of the rest of the lineage. Which only causes problems when you get... Yeah, it only causes problems when you have mental instability, jealousy, money, greed. Yeah, that's, all those little minor things. Okay. Now, because of the way the system operates, we deal, and I have done it here, we deal with the king. And in every case, we either skim over or barely touch upon the women involved. And I think, personally, that some of those factors are just as interesting. Now, I can't go back to Edward III and his wife and all that and bring you up to speed by walking through. But what I can do is I thought I'd start with one of the ladies who didn't help matters any. Okay? So if you would jump to Edward IV. He's on that first page that we made corrections of. And that's when I turned up that his mother was his wife. So Edward IV and his wife, Elizabeth Woodville. Now, if you remember the story, Elizabeth Woodville got married, shall we say, on the sly. She allegedly lay in waiting for the king as he rode by. Well, let's put a little meat on the bones. Elizabeth Woodville was one of 13 children born to Richard Woodville. 13. Jacquetta of Luxembourg, the widow of Henry V's brother John, was the Duke of Bedford, so the Woodville family certainly had connections, but Elizabeth was not considered nobility, a fact which would come to be quite significant later in her life. Now, just to show how little important she was, they don't know the date of her birth. So nobody cared about this poor girl. She's too far down the line, and she's a girl. Yeah. But in 1452, she married Sir John Grey of Groby. Now, Groby, this is nothing to be proud of. This is like saying he was the king of young America. I mean, Groby ain't nothing. As a matter of fact, Groby is about 2 stores right now, and there may be a house or 2, and that's all that's left. So Groby wasn't much then. And the fact that he was Sir John Grey of Groby means that, yes, he was the lord of the manor, but the manor was about all he was lord of. Sir John died in battle. He died in battle. So now here we've got a woman, unmarried. The only thing she's got working for her is a provision that in a widow's remarry, she has the choice of veto. That's the only thing she's got going for her. In law of this time, as a widow with children, she had the choice of veto for her second husband. The fact that she's going to get married again, that's a given. She's got no income because when her husband died, it all reverted to the king. So she's got no income. She's got no house. She's literally got the clothes on her back. And she's got 2 boys. The story says that when Edward was hunting, he took a chance and she set up a chance meeting in the wood. Ya sure, ya betcha. And she used the opportunity to plead for the return of her husband's estate. Well, they don't know what goes on. They do know that Edward was a notorious raptious womanizer. I like those words. I'm not sure how far I want to push them. But let's just say he was king. You know, he pretty much had and did what he wanted. She was described as a famous beauty. In 1464, the pair were married. Elizabeth was crowned king in 1465. They eventually have 10 children, including 7 girls, 5 of whom lived to adulthood. However, if someone today married one person while engaged to another, it might put a few noses out of joint, but that's about it. An engagement had almost the same legal binding status as a marriage then. An officially engaged person was already married. If Edward was already legally married, then his marriage to Elizabeth was null and void, and of course any children born after the marriage would be illegitimate. That would mean Edward, Prince of Wales, and Richard, the Duke of York, children of Edward and Elizabeth, were bastards. That's the argument that is used to topple these 2 boys from the chain. It was claimed in Parliament that the priest who performed the marriage ceremony for Edward and Elizabeth was, in fact, a fraudster. It was further claimed that Edward frequently employed the same tactics of going through a sham marriage with his puppet priest just to gain a willing wife to warm his bed. Now, they didn't look any farther than this when they presented the case. This was it. Elizabeth was a commoner. She wasn't nobility. She was 5 years older than Edward. She upset the social apple cart by marrying above her level. One of the people that she upset was Neville. Neville, the Duke of Warwick, quote, the kingmaker. She alienated him because he had been negotiating in France for a true princess. Those 2 hated each other from the word go, then and continuously now, as the story is going to progress. Those are 2 enemies. The argument, the problem, the big bump in the road is that they're both on one side. York and Lancaster, they're both on one side. Neville and Elizabeth Woodville are on the same side. it eventually causes Neville to switch sides. Now, Neville's an egotist, to say the least. Okay. Now, before the annulment of whatever you want to call that, the non-marriage, Elizabeth's physical presence allowed her family, of which there were a lot, but it allowed her family a footwork into the system. So who's going to be the sheriff of this, and who's going to be the duke of that? And the Woodvilles start building in importance. Neville doesn't like this, and those in power do not like this. And Elizabeth Woodville is alienated. Now, that in and of itself would have been enough. But in the great trial, Richard based his claim of illegitimacy on the claim that his brother Edward, the king, was illegitimate. This subject had been a matter of no little debate. It seems, here, you can work this, I'll just read it from the book. It seems that 9 months before Edward's birth, his mother Cecily Neville, the father of Richard of York, were in two different places while Richard was campaigning in France, giving rise to the rumor that his mother had taken a lover and thus Edward was a bastard. Based on Richard's claims, Edward's children were also declared illegitimate by an acquiescent parliament. You see how Richard caused that whole side of the house to implode. His own side, his own support, his own house of, and he's causing it to implode, to be destroyed. Why was he in France? That's the 100 Years' War.
From October 70 to May 71, he wasn't king.
No.
He was Edward IV.
Yes. So, now, she's going to fall, okay? You got it pretty well figured out she's going to fall? But remember, as she falls, two of her sons have disappeared. Okay? Had she quit, then should have been ahead, but she had a daughter. She had more than one, but one is all I need for this example. The name is Elizabeth of York. We're going to see her again when you realize who the wife of Henry VII, the eventual victor, is. If you'll take the sheet that I gave you and you look at Henry VII, the last entry at the bottom of the page where it says, wife, Elizabeth of York. That is the daughter. It's the brother to Edward V, but it is the daughter. Daughter to Elizabeth Woodville. Now, moving along. I want to go to Margaret Beaufort. Who? Why isn't she on the list? Well, she is. Way down the bottom. Mother, Margaret Beaufort. Notice her father was the son of John of Gaunt. That makes her John of Gaunt's granddaughter. But going back to this other page that I threw aside, where's John of Gaunt? He's doing an end run. His family has been doing an end run on this whole mess for the whole time. And so again, we've got somebody, well, these two are fighting. This one's going around the outside, coming in at the end and taking advantage of the messy mess that was left, okay? So Margaret Beaufort, now she's about as sweet as you could possibly get. I mean, wow, what a, her face would break wood. Margaret Beaufort was there in the background when her son defeated Richard III. And now we're going to spend a little time with Richard III because we've got Richard III's mother, and here I've got Richard III's wife. We will. Well, we're going to spend time to get through these two books. Richard III's mother, related around the outside, John of Gaunt. John of Gaunt. Third son of the king. And there was no second one because he was killed. So technically we're in the heir apparent column. Margaret Beaufort, when all was said and done, after all these other people took care of each other and bumped them off, was the only surviving son of John Beaufort, 1st Duke of Somerset. She was one of the most eligible marriage catches in the country. Margaret's father might have taken his own life. This would be John Beaufort. At the age of 40, Beaufort passed away from an ambiguously caused shortly after a humiliating military blunder in France. We're back in that 100 Years' War. Such an embarrassment that he was banished from court and almost accused of treason by the king. With such shame and mystery hanging over him, John's contemporaries whispered of suicide. Out, out. The Tudors owe Margaret Beaufort for their claim to the throne, albeit an illegitimate line. Beaufort was a descendant of King Edward III via his son John of Gaunt. Less fortunately, the Beaufort family only descended from royalty through John's affair with his longtime mistress, Catherine Swynford. Any wonder you can't keep track of this? I mean, this one king has got, I think, 15 or 16 illegitimate children into the half a dozen that he's got. So no, it's no wonder you can't keep track of it. It's no wonder it's confusing. If the women had teamed up on him, they'd have never handled the king. Well, this is true. Now, it's both ways. You could say the men didn't live very long because of the wars, and they didn't. And that does mean that some women would have 3 and maybe as many 4 husbands because they got killed in battle. On the other hand, a lot of women died in childbirth. And so many men went. So what today we call mixed marriages is a very, very commonplace. And I don't mean just once or twice. I'm talking kids from 4 wives, kids being 20 years old and 2 years old, all in the same building. Mixed marriages like that are very common. And what's happening, please remember what's happening, is that the latest man, whoever the last man in line here, he is inheriting all the titles and all the lands and all of the build and all of the taxes from every one of those previous marriages. The woman does not get to keep it. She can carry it as long as she gets married again, but then she has to give it to her next husband. Should he die, she can carry that package to her next husband, but she cannot carry it herself. Remember, she does have the right of veto as a widow. Fran's all worried about venereal diseases. Fran, don't you remember? Never mind. Fran, the thing is, while you are right in supposing, you must also remember that discretion here is extremely important. And so usually, it's one at a time. In other words, you have an affair with this woman, she gets pregnant, and you move on because she's pregnant. So it's not, like going to the pub on Friday night and scoring 3 times. It's not like, 4 times. You're right. It's not spread that much. It is kept. And you got to remember that when we're talking about the king here, the king does not go to the pub. If a king has an affair, it's usually with one of his minions' wives. He kept it in the castle. Not in his pants, but in the castle. All right. You're getting a picture, I hope, of a lot of people who are fighting for everything they can get. If they don't fight to keep that castle, they don't fight to keep the land that goes with that castle, they're broke. They don't have anything else other than the taxes that they can claim from that land. And if you don't have land, you don't have a vote in Parliament. Power is in land. The vote is Parliament, is in the land you hold and how much. So the man who marries 4 wives and 3 of them die in childbirth is a very rich man, because he has gotten, if he's married 4 women, 3 of them has had husbands who died, and those husbands left all of their goods to the wife, and that then went. Okay, you see what's happening here? And this is where Neville gets all of his power. Now, he's going to give some of it away. He's got to give some of it away in dowry when he gives up his, but he's going to give it away in barter. I will give you this land, but you will sign these treaties with me. I will give you this, but you will swear to this. Okay. Now, the mother of Henry VIII, then, because Henry VIII, Henry VII is said to be Welsh. Everybody, oh, he's Welsh. The only reason he's Welsh is because Margaret Beaufort's husband, mother, had land in Wales. That's the only reason he's Welsh. She's also indirectly, as you have seen, related to the other side. And because of it, they're laying low. They're keeping a low profile. They're way, way down in the inheritance ladder, and they're not going to create any waves. But remember, Margaret Beaufort has got that ace up her sleeve. She is the granddaughter of John of Gaunt. Direct line to the king. Well, to the heir. Now,
Who did Margaret Beaufort marry? Is that John, you said? Was that her husband?
Margaret,
Yeah.
she would have been, let's see, where's Margaret? Come here, Margaret. This is Neville. This is Beaufort. Bio here. Her father was the son of John Beaufort, mother of Henry VIII. Key figure, Bledsoe, father. Her father was the son of John Beaufort, son of the Earl, himself the illegitimate son of John of Gaunt. I knew there was another one in there somewhere. Her father, the Duke of Somerset, died when Margaret was but 1 year old after a failed expedition to France. He was accused of treason because he lost, and forbidden to appear in the king's presence, and his death was rumored at the time to have been suicide.
Okay, but who did she marry? Who was her husband?
Margaret Beaufort?
Yeah.
Margaret Beaufort, well, that was... No. Margaret Beaufort, mother. Where's her... The father...
Arlene is saying she married Edmund Tudor.
Yes. Yeah, Edmund. That is correct. Edmund is the right name. Yeah, Edmund. Because the kingmaker steps in and tries to, but she runs away. Get thee to a convent. All right. And we come up then with Neville coming in here with his youngest daughter, Anne, because he's married the oldest daughter to the other side. In other words, he's marrying Anne to a York, but he's already married his oldest daughter, Isabel, to a Lancaster. Oh yeah, that's playing both sides, you know. But remember I said he changed sides when he got mad at the king because the king married Woodville. That's when he changed sides. So when he changed side, the daughter changes sides too. So these two daughters, or sisters, if you will, are on opposite sides of the war. Woodville was a York. Elizabeth Woodville, when she married into son of Richard, Duke of York. She married Edward, who was of the York family. Anne Neville was born at a time of chaos. The Wars of the Roses had just begun, and the end was nowhere in sight. In fact, Anne would never see peace in her entire life. And to make matters worse, Anne's father was right in the middle of the action, and hard to stay out of the conflict when your father is the infamous kingmaker. That's the summation of her life. I don't think we need to spend time that. Her dad may have been one of the most important men in England, but Anne's mother was no slouch. Anne de Beauchamp was one of the wealthiest women in the entire kingdom. That made her inheritance very interesting to anybody who wanted power in England. Thanks to her ruthless father and her extravagant mother, men would be fighting over Anne Neville for her entire life. Something to obtain. Under normal circumstances, Anne and her older sister Isabel would barely have seen a cent of their parents' vast estate. But one fact changed everything. The couple never had a son. As Isabel and Anne grew older, they caught the eye of England's most powerful men, and that can be a very dangerous place to be. Okay? Now, this is where Neville thought they were going to end up. The Nevilles were distantly related to the rebellious Duke of York, Richard, the man many believed would become the king by the time the War of the Roses was over. York sent his two youngest sons, Richard and George, to live and train at Midlham Castle, where the two boys came to know the sisters Anne and Isabel very well. In just a few years' time, each of the brothers would marry one of the sisters, and yet all of their unions would end horribly. Young Richard spent an especially long time at Midlham training to be a knight. Even back then, the Duke of York and the Kingmaker might have discussed a marriage contract between Richard and Anne. While neither York nor Neville would live to see it happen, Richard and Anne would indeed end up husband and wife, though not the way their fathers had expected. Against all odds, they would end up ruling England as king and queen, albeit a brief, tragic period. Okay, this is Richard III we're talking about, all right? And Neville. I got to do this or we're going to just run out. So we'll move. The question people that I encounter, the one they usually have is, how does a woman from one side marry a man from the other side. How does a York marry a Lancaster? Don't you wish? Don't you wish? No. Actually, it is my mother's enemy is my friend. Okay? Remember we had a name not too long ago who lost 2 boys? 2. Now, just know that, okay, that's the woman I'm talking about. She had the 2 sons and a daughter, right? Mm-hmm. Hang on to that daughter. We're coming back. Did she respect Richard after her 2 boys disappeared? She and Richard are on the same side. But Richard may have killed her 2 sons to claim the crown. That made Richard her enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so we have Elizabeth Woodville and that whole side of the family, if you will, kind of shattering within, if you will, splitting that family. You take Richard III's family, that York family, and she's split it in half. I'd love to say he split the party, but that's getting awful modern and awful current. But you get the idea that we've got problems here. And Richard's personality and Richard's everything else did not bode well. And behind everyone's back, Elizabeth, Margaret formed a relationship. And in forming their relationship, we're going to marry off our children. This kids had nothing to do with this. They never do. But let's not play down the power of Elizabeth Woodville. She was hated by Richard, and she returned the compliment. She did anything she could, but she was from Richard's side of the argument. In other words, she was a York. And the question that I get asked is, well, how does a York marry a Lancaster? Well, it's very simple. When the Yorkist isn't proud, isn't defending, hates the Yorkist side. I'm a York, but I didn't marry into the York, and they haven't treated me well, and they've been dumping on me ever since I got married the first time. The whole pin here that people want to place is that, oh, well, here it comes. Henry comes along, and Henry has a battle with Richard, and Richard gets killed. Yeah, but wait a minute. Elizabeth Woodville's fingers are in here. And it's not whether she is this or she is that, or whether she did this or whether she did that. It's her absolute open hatred of Richard III. Yeah, they're cousins. Well, by marriage. But it is her hatred, Elizabeth Woodville's hatred of Richard III, because, and you want to know where the rumors of who killed the boys? Yeah. That whole side of the family was pushing that rumor. They hated Richard that much. They cross over. Oh, they can't cross over literally, but they can deny support. We're not going to help you, Richard. You're on your own. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going to support you a second time, Richard. You stabbed me in the back too many times, Richard. You want to go to war against Mr. Tudor? You go right ahead. But leave me out of this. You're on your own. And so there is a battle. And Richard does die. And there were some pretty, if you believe the reports of the battle, there were some pretty nasty backstabbing shenanigans going on during that battle. Other nobles with their armies that were supposed to show up didn't show up. Other armies that were supposed to go into this position didn't bother. Other nobles with their armies were supposed to back up this group over here, and they didn't. The battle fell apart. And all of a sudden, Richard III is literally standing out there in the middle of everything by himself. Now let's just quickly encase that battle. Remember, Richard had a deformation of the spine. That is known. Whether it's spina bifida or something like it, yeah. But he couldn't stand straight. He was better off in a suit of armor than he was not, because the suit of armor supported him. Shakespeare's line, my horse, a kingdom for a horse, because a suit of armor adds about 200 pounds. He couldn't move. He couldn't put one foot in front of the other. And he knew it. Now, in Shakespeare, Henry Tudor, kills Richard right there on the battlefield and takes the crown that he's wearing. Now, there's a little vanity for you. He's wearing a crown to the battlefield. And Henry takes the crown that Richard is wearing and places it on himself and crowns himself king. And it is called by right of conquest, which basically means we start all over again where we did in 1066 when William came ashore and took the whole island by right of conquest. But this is the beginning of the house of Tudor. And yes, now we can go sequentially for a while. We can go Henry VII and then, oh yeah, Henry VIII. Oh yeah, I heard of him. But do you see why Shakespeare was so concerned when he writes these plays, he's going to justify Henry Tudor's taking of the crown. Because Richard shouldn't have had it anyway. Richard was evil. And Henry was doing the country a good deed by killing Richard. And Shakespeare is doing this, why? Well, because two things. One, his queen, Elizabeth, has just died. And so we've had to go back up to Henry VIII's sisters. Wow, we got to go a long way around. But we'll prove, I'm sorry. Henry VIII from Shakespeare. We got to go James. We're going backwards now. James to Elizabeth, to Bloody Mary, to Edward, to Henry, okay? But in the middle of there, Henry VIII, he had two sisters, okay? Mary and Margaret. King of France. But the Dauphin of France dies, and they send her back. We don't want her. We don't have anybody for her to marry, and she becomes Mary Queen of Scots or Mary Stuart. Okay? Who has a son, James, who comes to rule England. Okay? So, in a way, and this has been debated many times, so we're not opening any, it's a can of worms, but we're not opening it. Please, who had a better right to the crown? Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's illegitimate daughter, or James through Henry VIII's sister. And if you track it, put it on paper and track it, you will find that Mary, Queen of Scots, had a better claim to the British throne than the British Queen, because of the actions of Henry VIII, declaring both Mary and Elizabeth illegitimate when his son Edward was born. Henry stuck his foot into it. No, wouldn't be the first time. Okay, let's just... The War of the Roses. It's a bloody, ugly thing. But does it accomplish anything? Not really. Oh, yeah, right. Plantagenets come in, then we go to one side, then we go to the other side. But then, in the end, we take the two sides and bring them back together again. When Henry VII marries Elizabeth of York, you're taking the two houses, the House of Lancaster and the House of York, and you're combining them. Was anything accomplished? Not really. Would Henry VII have been king anyway? Oh, probably not. Probably not. You got to get up there to Richard V, you know, the princes in the tower, and then you start speculating. You know, once you start doing that, you know, it's like writing fiction. You have no idea where you're going, but it just sounds good. So we come out the other side. And Henry Tudor, Henry VII, is now King of England. and his wife, Elizabeth of York, is his wife. Now we've got the House of York and the House of Lancaster combined in Henry VIII. Pardon? Her picture? Elizabeth of York? There she be. And Anne Neville. And Sweetums. Oh, Elizabeth Beaufort. Margaret. They even got it written out there, Margaret. And here we go, Elizabeth Woodville. Oh, and Henry. Yeah, Henry. Henry's mother is nothing to write home about, I'm afraid. But this would be Henry the Seventh, yes. His wife, Elizabeth of York. And his mother. Okay. That power of veto for the widow. No, I don't think so. I think you're right. But that power of veto, they all say, well, the women had no rights. That may have been the only right the noble woman had. But man, did they exercise it. I'm not going here, I'm not going there, I won't do this, I won't do that. Give them credit. I mean, they only had one pair of shoes, but boy, did they wear them. Okay? I wish I could cut the War of the Roses cleanly, but it's kind of like a bowl of spaghetti. You go into this end and you twist around and you come out this end and you got a start and you got an end. But in the start and the end are, believe it or not, connected, but all the twistings and turnings inside. And then every time you have a marriage, like the Woodvilles, that brings in a whole other family. That doesn't just bring in a woman, that brings in her family and her 12 brothers and sisters.
Well, it's interesting because her father and her husband, they fought for the Lancastrians originally, and her father switched to York.
Right.
I don't know if that's some of the reason she had such a hatred of Richard or not. But, I mean, everybody was changing sides.
Yeah, well, and that's what they would, even as late as the final battle. There were people on the hill watching the battle. Oh, I think our side is winning, so we'll join in. I think we're losing, so we're going home.
Or fight for the other guys.
Yeah, and fighting for the other guys, flip back. Fighting for the other guys put you on the good guys' team, so that means you got rewards from the good guys. Yeah.
Was somehow Lady Jane Grey may have been one of his descendants? Is that something you remember?
Well, the name Grey would do that. I mean, we'd be able to track it through the Greys, yes.
Down the road, like after Henry VIII, there's still
there's
conflict going on. Like who's the rightful heir?
Yeah. who is the rightful heir, and at the same time, you don't marry below your standard. Okay? And if you don't marry below your standard, then those families keep intertwining, intermixing, interentering. But the problem being that, yes, you do run in, and that's where the royal family is at. You do run into birth problems. You do run into hereditary problems. But more than anything else, once you make an enemy, you don't have the option to go into somebody else. It's not like if Fran really gets mad at me, I can go and sit with Bob. There aren't that many choices. I've only got 3 choices, and if I make 2 of them mad, now I don't have enough people to defend me if these other 2 rise up in opposition. And if those 2 rise up in opposition and there's not enough to defend me, I'm dead. Literally. The test will now begin. No. Okay, let's put the last episode in the magic player.
Nearly 600 years ago, England was torn apart by a series of bloody battles for the throne. In just 30 years, the crown changed hands 7 times. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. It was one of the most turbulent and violent periods in British history. It's known as the Wars of the Roses.
This is Bosworth Field. This is where it all ends, with the most famous battle of this whole violent time.
Henry Tudor, a minor noble and rank outsider, beats the infamous Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth and becomes Henry VII, the first Tudor king.
But how on earth does Henry Tudor, a royal nobody, come from nowhere to defeat the King of England? Well, I think his victory is engineered by one person, not a duke or a baron, but a woman. She manipulates and politics her way to the heart of a royal revolution that will change the course of English history. Her name is Margaret Beaufort.
Margaret Beaufort's story spans the whole of the Wars of the Roses. She works in the shadows through 3 decades of turmoil to protect her only child. Unbelievably, in a time of warrior kings, it's this woman who ends the conflict when she maneuvers her son, Henry Tudor, onto the throne of England. As England descends into bloody chaos, in a windswept castle in Wales, a 13-year-old girl is in labour. Even by medieval standards, Margaret Beaufort is obscenely young to be pregnant.
Come forth.
The birth is so traumatic, she will never bear another child. All her hopes are bound up in this one baby boy. She christens him Henry Tudor. This 13-year-old girl and her baby son will change the face of England. Right from the start, Margaret and her son are in a struggle for survival. As if being a mother at 13 wasn't enough. Margaret's also a widow. Her husband, little Henry's father, was an obscure nobleman, Edmund Tudor, who died of plague 3 months ago. In the medieval world, power and control are exercised by men. Without a husband, Margaret is virtually helpless. Now, her only protector is Edmund's brother, Jasper Tudor.
No, he may enter.
But Jasper's power to protect her is limited.
May I?
Margaret's late husband, Edmund Tudor, and his brother Jasper Tudor are half-brothers of the king.
Henry.
Unfortunately, it's the wrong half. Edmund and Jasper share the same mother as the incompetent Henry VI, but their father was no king. He was the Dowager Queen's handsome Welsh squire, Owen Tudor, basically a nobody. Because their connection to royalty is through their mother, it's so obscure, it's basically worthless. Everything the Tudor boys have is owed to the grace and favour of their half-brother, Henry VI. As long as little Henry's uncle is on the throne, looking favourably on them, Margaret and her baby son are relatively safe. But Henry VI is a useless king. His rule is under attack. If the king goes, Margaret and baby Henry could lose everything. As a medieval widow, Margaret knows what she must do to protect herself and her baby son. Find a new husband. But that decision comes with a heavy price.
It's time.
Under medieval law, if she remarries, Margaret must give up her son to his nearest male relative. She can't take him with her. But Margaret's smart, and at 13, already a ruthless pragmatist. She knows her baby will be safe at Pembroke, looked after by his trusted uncle Jasper. Just 2 months after Henry's birth, with Edmund barely cold in the ground, Margaret rides out from here with Jasper to find a new husband. And that's pretty extraordinary. She's practically a child. She's just been through a traumatic birth, and she's riding through a plague-ridden and politically unstable land. Plus, as a medieval woman, the job of finding her a husband would normally be down to her guardian. So this is someone who wants control of her own destiny. And what she really wants is the power and the influence to protect herself and her son. She's got the perfect match in mind. In January 1458, after the bare minimum period of mourning, Margaret marries her second husband, Henry Stafford. They look an unlikely couple. She's barely a teenager, he's in his 30s. But in reality, Margaret's engineered an incredibly smart match. As a man from an important noble family, Stafford's got power, but as a second son, almost no money. Margaret is the sole heir to the Beaufort fortune. She's loaded, but as a woman, she's powerless. Together, they have the essential ingredients to prosper in the medieval world: money and power. This makes it a marriage of mutual respect, even affection. This is quite a turnaround for Margaret. Her estates are flourishing, she's in a successful marriage, and her son is secure. But then, just 3 years into her marriage, her comfortable life is turned upside down. It all goes wrong for Margaret on a frozen battlefield in Yorkshire. Henry VI's army is annihilated. Now there's a young and charismatic new king. Edward IV.
Long live the king! Long live the king!
Margaret's family is on the losing side. Her husband, Stafford, fought against Edward in the battle. He's lucky to escape with his life. And it just gets worse for Margaret. Pembroke Castle, where her son lives with his uncle Jasper, is taken by Edward's men. Jasper escapes. But Margaret's little boy Henry, just 5 years old, is left behind.
He must be here somewhere.
Still a fight there, don't they?
Look everywhere.
We'll go right. Make sure you search everywhere. Cupboards, wardrobes.
Yes, sir.
Anything?
He's not here.
No, sir. Right! Back to the courtyard.
Must have gone.
I have finished. Now, soldier. Waste of time.
Got you, boy.
Long live the king! Long live the king!
Margaret's son, Henry Tudor, is in the hands of one of the new king's men. As a noble child, he is at least being honourably brought up and is safe from harm. But separated from his family, he's effectively a prisoner. And worst of all, the new king strips little Henry of all his lands. The thing to understand is that in the Middle Ages, land means security. It brings you power, it makes you important. Ultimately, it protects you. Without his lands, Henry's position is increasingly shaky, and Margaret knows it. So now, Margaret has a new mission. Get her young son's lands restored to him. To do that, she must turn her enemies into allies and ingratiate herself with the new king, Edward IV. This can't have been easy for Margaret. She was allied emotionally and physically with Henry VI. After all, her son is his nephew. And now, in order to protect her son, she has to cozy up with Henry's mortal enemy. Her husband Stafford swears loyalty to the new king and gets them both a pardon. Finally, after 5 years of hardcore schmoozing, Margaret persuades Edward IV to return an estate to her that he'd snatched from her Beaufort family. This is what remains of Woking Palace, a place we know was very dear to Margaret's heart. Now, today, it's just a few brick walls, but in its time, this was a huge and sprawling manor house. Now, the fact that Margaret was allowed all of this splendour and wealth in an age where land equals power is a sign that she'd finally persuaded King Edward IV that he could trust her. 2 years later, always keen to promote her interests, Margaret and her husband Stafford invite Edward to Woking for a hunting party. Now 25, Margaret dresses for the king in her finest velvet and orders the very best hospitality.
My Lady Margaret.
Your Grace, we are honoured by your presence. You are truly the mightiest of hunters.
The lands are most abundant for the hunt. Truly there is so much game here. Perhaps I should regret returning this estate to your care. But I do not believe it could be in more loyal hands.
Margaret must be feeling pretty confident that the restoration of her young son's lands can't be far away. But then, barely 9 months later, everything's turned on its head. Edward IV falls out with his most powerful ally, the Earl of Warwick.
Your move, cousin.
Your Majesty, Warwick's troops are close. They've come in through the east gate.
Warwick stages a coup. The king is forced to run for his life from Warwick's men. On October the 3rd, 1470, Warwick releases Henry VI from the Tower.
Long live the king!
And, unbelievably, puts him back on the throne. This is an incredible opportunity for Margaret, and she seizes it with both hands. With her son's uncle back in power, this is Margaret's chance to get her boys' lands back. So without missing a beat, she heads straight to London and comes here, to the Palace of Westminster, to sort things out with the king himself. But after cozying up to Edward IV, the bloke who kicked Henry off the throne, this is a risky play.
My Lady Margaret.
My liege and true king, it gladdens my heart to see you restored to your rightful place after so long.
But Margaret has an ace up her sleeve.
My son.
After 9 years, she's reunited with Henry, now almost 14. She's brought him to meet his uncle, and there's a lot riding on his debut at court.
Henry Tudor. Named for you, my king.
Come. Closer.
Out of the blue, Henry VI makes an astonishing prediction about his young half-nephew.
One day, you will assume the helm of state. You are destined to hold everything in your grasp.
He seems to be suggesting that Henry will one day succeed him as king. Well, that's a pretty amazing thing for Margaret to hear, but it must at least encourage her to know that she's on track to get her son's lands back. And after all, that's the one thing she really cares about. But just 6 months later, Margaret's world is turned upside down. Yet again. Margaret's here at Woking when she receives this letter from her husband, Henry Stafford. Now, the original is at St John's College, Cambridge, and is a mere scrap of paper, hardly legible. But when we blow it up to this size, you can see it's been written in a real hurry. It's in Stafford's own hand. And he says, "I bequeath my soul to Our Lady St Mary and to all the holy company of heaven, and my body to be buried whereas it shall best please God that I die." So this is Stafford's very hastily made will, and the fact that he's sending it here to Margaret is incredibly poignant, because he's sending her a message. He's telling her that he's going into battle and he might never make it home. Edward IV has returned to take back the throne from Henry VI. Stafford swore loyalty to Edward to protect his family. Now, he's got to make good on that promise. This is a nightmare for Margaret. She's caught between her loyalty to Henry and her husband's pledge to Edward. On the 14th of April 1471, Stafford goes into battle alongside Edward at Barnet to crush the man who put Henry VI back on the throne, the Earl of Warwick. Margaret can't go to the battleground herself. But she can't just sit around and wait for news. She dispatches a rider from Woking to find out what's happening to her husband.
I cross this land. I cross these seas. I cross my heart and to I take your hand to save my soul in your embrace. I found my home.
When Margaret's rider returns, he brings grave news. Edward IV is back, and this time, he's not in a conciliatory mood. He begins a purge of the old king's allies.
Sure it's done.
He has two of Margaret's closest relatives put to death. This is incredibly traumatic for Margaret. If Edward IV is exterminating the old king's relatives, then she must realise that her son, Henry VI's nephew, will be next on the list. So forget fighting for his lands, forget about politics. Now she's just a mother fighting for the life of her son. Her young son Henry is with his uncle Jasper at Pembroke Castle. Margaret sends one of her loyal servants to save his life.
Go to my son this instant.
She sends one very simple message.
What should I tell him, my lady?
Run.
Run for your life. 14-year-old Henry Tudor flees England.
My lady.
Is he safely gone?
He is.
Exiled in Brittany, Henry is safe. But Margaret has no idea if she will ever see her son again. It's a disastrous year for Margaret. She not only loses her son, she loses her husband. In October, Stafford dies of his battle wounds. At the age of 28, Margaret is a widow for the second time. She is alone and vulnerable. She's already lived through 3 regime changes and 2 husbands. Every time she blinks, the world around her changes. But her mission hasn't. Save her son, save herself. Well, her son's safe in exile. Now she needs to survive too. She does what she always does, takes a deep breath and makes the pragmatic call. She's faced with the same problem she had as a 13-year-old widow. She needs security. She needs protection. In medieval England, that means only one thing: a husband. In June 1472, Margaret marries Lord Thomas Stanley. Little do they know that their match will change history. Unlike her previous husband, Stanley is immensely rich. But that's not really what Margaret's interested in. She's got enough wealth of her own. What she wants is Stanley's influence, because Stanley is steward to Edward IV's household. So virtually every day of his life, he's in the same room as the king. And that means Margaret now has a hotline direct to Edward IV. It's an astounding political play. Stanley's status makes Margaret a royal insider at the court of King Edward and his wife, the Queen, Elizabeth Woodville. A future ally. For 11 years, England enjoys a period of unparalleled stability under Edward. Margaret takes every opportunity to ingratiate herself with Edward.
Fine move, Your Grace.
10 years after marrying Stanley, Margaret, now 40, finally manages to get what she wants for her son.
We wish it known that Henry Tudor, called Earl of Richmond, shall receive a settlement of land from his mother, the Countess of Richmond, to the value of 600 marks.
An official agreement with the king himself for her son to have his lands back and return to court.
To be in the grace and favour of His Majesty.
Margaret must be ecstatic. After 20 years, her charm offensive has paid off. This is Henry's ticket home. But life in the Wars of the Roses turns on a dime. The wax is barely dry on the agreement seal before disaster strikes.
Okay.
Edward IV dies. Margaret's back to square one. 3 months later, England has a new king. Edward IV's younger brother, Richard.
On July the 6th, 1483, Richard III is crowned King of England here at Westminster Abbey. It's the denouement to one of the most shocking and controversial pieces of political skullduggery imaginable.
Richard has snatched the crown from his nephew, Edward IV's 12-year-old son, and locked him and his brother up in the Tower of London. Richard ropes Lord Stanley and his wife, Margaret Beaufort, into the coronation. She carries the new Queen's train. He carries the King's mace. Because Richard needs to shore up his dodgy claim to the throne.
So what does Margaret make of Richard? Well, in a sense, she could see his rise to power as just another period of political chaos to be safely negotiated. But I think she'll see this one rather differently. Margaret knows the young princes from her time at court. Certainly, she knows their mother, Elizabeth Woodville. And Margaret's a woman with a highly developed instinct for protecting her own son. So I think she'll see Richard as her most dangerous opponent yet.
By September 1483, pretty much everyone believes that Richard has had his nephews, the princes in the Tower, murdered. This changes everything for Margaret. Richard is a child-murdering tyrant who could turn on anyone. There is no deal Margaret can do with him that will protect her son.
Now that Margaret can't fall back on simple politics, she's forced to think more radically. She could run away and live in exile with her son. She could stay, keep her head down and never see her son again. Instead, she thinks way outside the box and comes up with an absolutely breathtaking idea. Richard must go, and she has the perfect replacement, her son, Henry Tudor.
It sounds crazy, but there aren't really any alternatives. Almost everyone else on the royal line has died or been murdered. Margaret starts to sniff out potential allies. Richard has made so many enemies, she's spoiled for choice.
Long live the King!
Long live the King!
Margaret's decision is one of the pivotal moments in English history. But what she's planning would be extraordinary for anyone, let alone a medieval woman. She's going to usurp the crown of England. This is crazy, or it would be for anyone but Margaret.
Her biggest problem is her exiled son's desperately weak claim to the throne. All his royal connections come through women. They're almost worthless.
Margaret's plan is rather brilliant because it hinges on the one person who hates Richard more than anyone else, Elizabeth Woodville.
Edward IV's widow.
Elizabeth's father and brother have been executed. And her two little boys have disappeared, presumed murdered at Richard's hand. Now, Elizabeth's trapped here at Westminster Abbey in sanctuary with her 5 daughters.
But Richard has the abbey surrounded by soldiers. Luckily, Margaret and the old queen share a physician, Louis Caerleon, who can pass freely.
Pray enter, good doctor. You are most welcome.
Caerleon puts Margaret's proposition to Elizabeth. Margaret wants to plug her son into the royal family. Her idea is to marry Henry Tudor to Elizabeth's daughter by Edward IV, Elizabeth of York. Unite the English nobility and make their children king and queen.
The old queen accepts, and the deal sets in motion a sequence of events that will end in blood. The only question is, whose?
In late September 1483, Margaret sends a good great sum of money to Henry in France to fund an invasion.
Wait!
Within a month, Henry set sail with 7 ships and 515 men. But Margaret's grand plan goes disastrously wrong. A storm blows up in the Channel and Henry's fleet is scattered. They end up off the coast of Devon, where Richard's men are waiting. Henry's forced to scuttle back to France with his tail between his legs. Margaret's rebellion has been a disaster, and worse, Richard now knows exactly who his enemies are: Margaret Beaufort and her son, Henry Tudor. Richard orders Stanley to isolate his wife, remove all her servants, and prevent her communicating with her son. Margaret has committed high treason. Richard III has murdered his enemies for less. But he needs powerful men like Margaret's husband on his side. In the end, what saves her is her smart marriage to Stanley.
Margaret can actually count herself lucky. If she'd been married to anyone else, she'd be in even bigger trouble. But inwardly, she must be seething. She's lost her lands and her status. She's reduced to a mere wife. It's not really her style. So more than ever before, she's determined that Richard has to go.
And Margaret's not the only one thinking that way. Richard has stripped her rebel allies of their lands and titles too. Now in exile, they have nothing left to lose and no way back as long as he's on the throne.
After the failure of the rebellion, most of the nobles involved fled straight into the waiting arms of Henry Tudor. Now he's effectively set up an alternative royal court in France, with him at the centre.
The failed rebellion certainly hasn't dented Henry's confidence, as evidence here at the British Library reveals.
This is a 17th century copy of a letter originally sent by Henry Tudor to his supporters in England, and it's a passionate call to arms in what he describes as my just quarrel against the unnatural tyrant, Richard. But what's really interesting is the way he signed himself. It's an H and an R, and the H is obviously his name, but R stands for Rex. He's calling himself Henry the King.
Margaret's work preparing her son to be king has clearly paid off. He's primed. All she has to do now is pull the trigger. She sends a message to Henry to land in Wales. She'll have money and men waiting for him. On the 7th of August 1485, loyal servant Christopher Urswick is sent to Margaret by her son. But he hasn't come from France. He's come from the port of Milford Haven in Wales. Henry's back with an army.
To avoid Richard's men in South Wales, Henry marches north, then east. He crosses into England via the River Severn here at Shrewsbury. When he reaches the city gates, Margaret sent Urswick back to him.
In mid-August, Urswick reaches Henry with a huge amount of money from his mother to pay his soldiers. This is open defiance of Richard's orders. Stanley is supposed to be keeping his wife under house arrest. Instead,
She's been doing absolutely everything she's been banned from, using her servants, communicating with her son, directing his insurrection. Margaret's husband's status won't save her from Richard a second time. She knows that soon she'll either be mother of the King of England, or they'll both be dead.
On the 22nd of August 1485, Henry and Richard finally come head to head, here at Bosworth Field. Henry has an army of around 5,000 men, but Richard has him comprehensively outnumbered with as many as 15,000 troops.
watching over the battleground is Lord Stanley with his brother William and 3,000 men. Waiting for their moment. Nobody knows which way they will side. Although Margaret is architect of the whole rebellion, by the time she hears back from the battlefield, her fate has already been sealed.
The battle began early. Henry seized the initiative, and his troops marched along this track at first light, leaving Richard's men scrambling into battle order.
The fighting is ferocious. Both Richard and Henry are in the thick of it. Then, in the heat of battle, Richard spots Henry just a stone's throw away, almost unprotected. He knows if he kills him, he's won. Up on the rise, the Stanleys are still sitting on their hands when Richard seizes his moment and charges at Henry Tudor. In the next minutes, the future King of England will be decided. And there's a delicious irony to what happens next.
Even though Margaret was absent from the field, the battle hinged on her actions, because she'd turned her husband Stanley to Henry's cause. And it was Stanley's intervention that decided the outcome.
Richard is only seconds away from Henry when the Stanleys finally make their move.
Stanley's men raced down from that rise. Richard was charging towards Henry, sword drawn, when Stanley's men waded in. In the melee, Richard was unhorsed.
The end was quick, and it was brutal. Henry Tudor, 28, a minor noble and an absolute rank outsider in the royal line, has taken the throne. Margaret Beaufort has triumphed. Richard's crown is taken from the battlefield and placed on the new king's head by Margaret's husband, Stanley himself.
Long live the king! Long live the king!
Margaret Beaufort is mother of the King of England. She's still only 42 years old.
Margaret protected herself and her son through one of the bloodiest periods in our country's history. And not only that, she outlived Henry and was here at Westminster Abbey for the coronation of her grandson, Henry VIII. She died a few days later, and this splendid tomb is a monument to a 13-year-old single mum who founded the most famous dynasty in Britain. Now that's quite a woman.
France. It's France. It's that point, peninsula, that sticks out toward, that's Brittany. Yeah. And remember, that was one of the last pieces of continental land which was controlled by England. War of the 100-Year War had caused England to retreat from most of that land. And all they had left was Brittany. Calais. Well, they still have Jersey and what's the other one? Jersey, Orkney, no. Guernsey, yeah, 2 cows, Jersey and Guernsey. They were actually held by the Nazis during World War II. So, yeah, that's right. You got it. You've got it. Aleutians, and yeah, and now the Chinese are building airports out in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, exactly. Well, this is the time to ask the questions. I know it's deep, and as when we opened this thing up, I said it's confusing. Philippa, yes, Philippa, making a fortune off of it.
Who was Edward III married to? He was back the one who had all the sons.
Let me see what my resources say here. Edward III, here we go. We had him... Edward III of England married Philippa of Hainault, Hainault, in 1328, and she died in 1369. Yeah, Edward the Black Prince is Isabella, the Countess of Bedford. Boy, she went down. Joan, Lionel, Duke of Clarence, John, the Duke of Lancaster, Edmund, the Duke of York, Mary, the Duchess of Brittany, Margaret, the Countess of Pembroke, Thomas, the Duke of Gloucester, the House of Plantagenet. His father, Edward II of England, and his mother was Isabella of France. No, Hainault, Hainault. I don't know if that would be German or if that would be French, but I'm betting French, Ault. Edward was crowned at age 14 after his father was deposed by his mother. Yes, yes, I have stood there at that black tomb. That is... Yes, we are going to Canterbury. Yes. If they turn me loose in Canterbury and don't assign me a guide, I might never come out of there. If they assign a guide, I suppose it'll be 45 minutes and out the back door. Yeah. Oh, it is that, and then some. Natural causes, and look at those natural leprosy. And a lot of it, when they say deceased or this and that, like son of Richard, Duke of, died of an illness, well, 9 times out of 10, you're either looking at pneumonia or tuberculosis. And they called it consumption. They didn't know what was going on. I always get asked about now. Somebody's laying in wait, and I don't know who that would be. But anyway, what are we doing next time? This is next month, right here. The Secrets of the National Trust. Now, what is the National Trust? Their National Trust, or their, what you and I think of a national park system which also has controls of the famous buildings. So Lincoln's home in Springfield, Illinois, instead of being owned by the Illinois Historical Society, would be operated by the National Trust. Now, they don't have the parks that we do, or the park is hooked onto, like there is a park at Windsor Castle. Okay, so usually it's simpler, let's put it that way. But there are many places then that are given to the National Trust, and it's up to the National Trust to tear them down or refurb them. And quite often, because of the laws, it costs them a lot to refurbish. And when they open them up, they find doorways they hadn't anticipated. They find roofs that they hadn't anticipated. They find all kinds of things. And yes, they've even found a few people. And so what I chose, or what I have chosen, are 4 different projects of theirs. One in the Lake District that Bob loves so well. That's because he fell up there, and he fell for the Lake District. Yeah, no, he fell in the Lake District. But there are 4 projects that I've chosen, and if you like it, I bought 2 series, so there are a total of 18 projects. These are 4, and if you like it, we can always go back and visit it again with a different 4. But what did they have to do on this project? How much did it cost overrun? Why did it cost overrun? What laws were they contending with in most cases? Because they go through and they try and get this law waived, or they try and get that law waived. You know, the law says we got to replace oak with oak. Well, yeah, but if we put a steel beam in there, it'd be a lot safer. So there's that kind of thing. No, that is correct. Some of them they have to, get in there, flatten the ground out, sod it, and leave it alone. And it's going to fall down someday, and there's nothing. On the other hand, Stonehenge, they went in and they concreted the difference between the stones to keep them from separating. So some of them, and those decisions are very political. Very political. Now they're, again, those of you who were at Stonehenge, you know that road that was just off to the side, that's the one they want to turn into a tunnel. And they want to, down at the bottom of that hill over there, they want to make it go down, and at the bottom of this hill over here, they want to make it come out about 2.5 miles. And they were all set to do it, and they had it all figured out how they were going to do it, and then about a half a mile away, they turned up some skeletons. And now they're afraid that if they put the tunnel in, because they can't see what they're doing, because with those big tunneling machines, they're afraid they're going to eat something up of national importance. And so now they don't know if they're going to do the tunnel or not. It's back to square one, and the money involved is they're using ground penetrating radar to see what's down there. I did not choose Stonehenge as one of them for obvious reasons, because Sutton Hoo, all right, Sutton Hoo, we're going to be very close to Sutton Hoo, very close. We may even, if we lean on the bus driver, he may even. But the problem now is that it's like Woodhenge. There's nothing there. They took it out, they put it in a museum, and now where it was, there's nothing but a hole in the ground. And to do it justice, you got to go to the museum, but the museum is 20 miles that way, and we're going this way, and that kind of stuff. But Sutton Hoo, they keep finding stuff also, but this is Viking now. So you're going to jump up into the 400s to 800s, where the henge, of course, is 3,000 to 5,000 years old, depending upon who you want to believe. They did find the other day, though, I was so elated, I'm still waiting for my copy to come. In Wales, they found the original Stonehenge. The stones in Stonehenge are recycled. And so the blue stones, the ones that are about the size of a man, woman, human, those stones were recycled. Those are the ones that came from Wales, the ones that 200 and some miles, whatever it was. They have found where they came from. And everybody said, well, they came from a quarry. They did, but they went from a quarry to a site. And they lived at a site for a while, and then they came to Stonehenge. So, because there were 60 stones, I don't know. I'm waiting for the story to come to me. But I think there were like 60 stones, and they transported 52 of them and left some, and they're still there. And so they know now. Yeah, and the question is, again, the who has always been the question, but now the question is, why? Why do you tear apart a circle of standing stones and take some of them 200 miles away? And one already has come out. One thesis is, I can shut up here, I've been talking until 4 o'clock. One thesis has already come out that the tribe or the clan made the decision to move, and they wanted to take their temple with them. Well, so why did they move? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But anyway, that's the National Trust, and that's where we're going next month. I'm sorry? I'm going to leave it in here, because if I give you, I know the name. I think I know the names, but they don't mean anything. They're not open. They're not a place that you could go to. Yeah, the reconstruction. Charles is the right person at the right time for this reconstruction thrust. He is the one that's making sure. He's the one that says you got to keep the front 6 feet of every building. What you do beyond that, you can tear down, as long as you keep the front 6 foot of the facade. So they literally cut the face off of the building and put a new building behind an old face. Yeah, air conditioning, the whole bit. Yeah. Oh, that's what they're having fun. In London, they're doing that. And they're having tons of fun with it. You know, big saws to cut through the stones and everything to cut the face off. Mm-hmm. Exactly.